From a highly secure network of top secret locations across North America, this is the Spurs Insider Road Trip Edition. I'm your host, Mike Finger, joined by our usual panel of Express News Spurs beat writers Jeff McDonald and Tom Orsborn, along with sports editor Nick Talbot. Jeff and I in our secure locations in the frigid north, as opposed to the frigid south. The whole country's frigid this week, and so are the local Cagers, unfortunately. When we talked to you last time, we had predicted, I believe, a 2-2 four-game stretch, which the Spurs got, but they got those two victories in an unexpected way, perhaps. And now, Jeff, we're talking to the listeners after the second consecutive blown fourth quarter lead. It is all okay in Spurs land.
It is kind of interesting. I think I predicted a 1-3 stretch. So they've actually outperformed my expectations. But then it's hard to, the way things played out, it's hard to not feel like they left something on the table there. You know, being up in the fourth quarter at home on the second night of a back-to-back against Denver and then blowing it. And then up 19 against Chicago and up 13 going into the fourth quarter and up 7 with 3 minutes to go and just blowing it. Like leading the whole game in Chicago. Chicago didn't take its first lead till 47 seconds to go, and that's all the Bulls needed. Won the game. So it's kind of like what Mitch Johnson said last night after that game. Like they've in the last 100 some odd minutes of basketball, they've played really, really good, except for just a couple of stretches that cost them 2 wins. So they can feel a little good about what they have accomplished, but they still have to feel like, man, they could have gotten greedy and gotten some more wins in that stretch.
Fighting a little bit of human nature, as Mitch Johnson said. Victor Wembanyama channeling Bill Parcells, as we often do on this podcast, saying we probably should have more wins, but we don't deserve more wins because you are what your record says you are. And that's been the case so far for this team. I do think it's just amazing how quickly the outlook of a team's just spot in the league, just the vibe of the season can change. Even during the course of one back-to-back where they got that victory in Denver that nobody on this podcast, and I'm not sure anybody outside of the Spurs locker room thought they were going to be able to go to Denver and win that game in the Mile High City. And then come back and almost beat them twice. Just 2 epic games against Nikola Jokic. It's just strange to look at this week and think they got the 2 victories everybody thought they would, but the sky is falling. Tom, is the sky falling?
Well, it's funny, as you were pointing out, Mike, kind of ebbs and flows. I wrote a story on December 14th after their shorthanded come from behind win in Portland, about how much they'd improved. They're one of, at that point, they're one of the best clutch teams in the NBA statistically.
Yeah.
Now not so much, but yeah, what was sad about last night's game is Chris Paul, after, telling me in the locker room after the Denver game, I'm going to become more involved in the offense. He sure did. I mean, that was a nice fourth quarter by him. And, they squandered that. But,
It's some huge shots.
Right.
It's even those games where just like it's shot maker after shot maker, like the games that the Spurs used to play back in the day when it seemed like everything mattered.
And other plays.
Chris Paul hit a bunch of big ones. I mean, Chris Paul was their best player in the fourth quarter last night, and
he was the only player to score a field goal for them in the final 7 minutes of that game.
Yeah. And doing other things too. I mean, he was fantastic.
And we talk about how much the vibe or the storyline can change from game to game, night to night. It seemed like from minute to minute last night. Jeff and I sitting there in the United Center talking about how the Spurs were going to weather those last couple minutes when Mitch sent Victor Wembanyama to the bench, and the Spurs just had been getting overwhelmed every time Wembanyama went to the bench. The Bulls were just killing them. And so I believe the Spurs lead was 3 or 4 with about 5 or 6 minutes to go, Jeff. And how are they going to weather these 2 minutes? Can Mitch leave Victor on the bench for a minute, 2 minutes? Well, somehow during that stretch, the Spurs actually extend the lead to 7 points, and you bring Victor Wembanyama back onto the floor with a 7-point lead, your best player. You think everything's golden, and I believe what happened next, 10-0,
10-0,
Chicago run, and that was it. Pretty wild.
All night long, the Spurs, until the end, the Spurs overwhelmingly won the minutes when Victor was on the floor and overwhelmingly lost the minutes when Victor was off the floor.
Yep.
Until the very end when that just completely flip-flopped and they actually won those that little bit of minutes in the fourth quarter where Victor was on the bench and then got wiped out when Victor came back in. It was just bizarre.
He ended up as a -6, I think, in the plus minus, which often can be misleading, but that's just for that to flip like that at the end. And it wasn't necessarily because of anything Victor did or didn't do. It's sometimes, to repeat the Mitch Johnson phrase, you're fighting the human nature of getting complacent and getting a little satisfied with yourself. And I think that's that game is kind of a microcosm of that fight over the course of a season. In a season, you fight the human nature of getting a little satisfied and getting a little of a feeling that we figured it all out after you beat the Clippers at home on New Year's Eve, which we haven't mentioned it on this podcast, after you beat Denver on the road and think you're in it. I mean, I think they got as high as 7th place in the West, and you're thinking playoffs, not just play-in, playoffs, and now it's going to be a fight, and it always was going to be a fight. But yeah, like Tom said, the ebbs and flows during the course of an 82 game season are quite striking sometimes.
And it helps to remember this is a team that's still learning a lot of things. They've come leaps and bounds from last year, but there's a step in there about, developing a killer instinct. And, in the course of the game, when you're up 15, keeping it at 15, pushing it to 20, not like I think it was Harrison Barnes talking to us in the locker room last night. When you're up 15, don't wait till it's 8 to get that urgency back. Like your urgency should be to push that out to 20 by the end of the quarter and that sort of thing. And I think that's kind of what happens sometimes when this team, any young team really, has a little bit of a success. It's like, well, we're still up by 11. Well, we're still up by 9. Well, and then by the time you know it, it's a tie ball game and you have a fight on your hands. And it's always better to not get into a streak fight. Just, when you're ahead, stay ahead and do the things that got you there, continue to do the things that got you there. You'll see them be up 15 and kind of feeling loosey-goosey, and somebody will take a bad 3 or somebody will throw a behind the back pass, or they'll try a lob that shouldn't have been tried. And it's just, you want them to stay fundamental even when they're up 15, 17, 18 points to keep the lead there or push the lead out, because if you screw around with any team in the NBA, as we saw last night, they can come back on you.
And to be fair, there have been plenty of occasions this year where the Spurs have been the team that has been down 15, 16 and come back. So, their opponent, they've taken advantage of that same dynamic in reverse.
Didn't Victor say that?
These do blow leads. Yeah. Victor,
I don't worry about when we're behind. I worry about when we're ahead.
That's crazy. And it's sort of true. And that's not just the Spurs. That's not just a young team. That's the modern day NBA where no lead is safe. But it is interesting to look at sometimes that you feel better about their ability to come back than you do about their ability to hold the team off. That just came in waves last night with the Bulls. Huge dunk by Kobe White. Another thing that flipped during the game is we spent most of the first 3 quarters talking about how this franchise of Michael Jordan, just everybody was petrified to go to the rim against Victor. Did he finish with 8 or 9 blocks?
8, yeah.
And those were the shots he blocked. How many did he just prevent them from even trying because they didn't want to try him anymore? And then what decides the game? Just a vicious, thundering slam dunk by Kobe White over Victor Wembanyama. It was that was a heck of a play. Do we want to go back and review more of the week as a whole, more positive vibes. Those it seems like a long time ago. It was last year when the Spurs played the Clippers, but that was a pretty decent, pretty encouraging all around home effort by the local Cagers.
Yeah, wire to wire win. And
Wire to wire win.
yeah,
Top,
it does seem like a long time ago.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then I think we're also giving short shrift here to the really epic, really entertaining, really fun back and forth between Wemby and Jokic. I mentioned a little bit earlier, but I mean, those are the kind of games you can envision watching for years to come, right?
Yeah, and what I found interesting about those pair of games is just I guess I hadn't really delved too deeply into it, but then when you watch them, the Nuggets are using the Spurs are using Wemby the way the Nuggets have grown to use Jokic, and that's interesting to me. That's kind of the archetype that the Spurs are after. It's not that they're the same player exactly. I mean, Wemby jumps and Nikola doesn't, but it's just the skill sets both of them have to be able to do basically anything, and you can play them anywhere, and you can put them in any sort of situation, and just hunt your advantages that way. That's kind of what the Spurs are doing with Victor. And Mitch told us before that first game in Denver that when we won the lottery to get Victor Wembanyama, like before we'd even met him, we were going through tapes of different teams and players and how they're used, and like Jokic and the Nuggets were what we zeroed in on, because we could envision constructing an offense the way the Nuggets have constructed an offense around Nikola Jokic. So when you watch those games, it's kind of like maybe seeing into the future a little bit of what the Spurs envision. When they get everything on board, they probably need more shooters. Like Jokic has a couple guys where if you double team him, he can whip it out there to the 3-point line, and you got a guy that's probably going to knock it down. I don't think the Spurs have an abundance of those yet, but a couple more catch and shoot guys, get Victor more comfortable with a lot of the things that they want him to do. And I think, if you watch the Nuggets games, you can see what the Spurs are gunning for down the road.
Yeah, and even those 2 fourth quarters and overtime of the second one, you would see Victor doing Jokic things at one end of the floor and Jokic doing Victor things at the other end of the floor. It was kind of a mini back and forth chess match between them. I think it was the game in Denver when Victor drew like 3 defenders to him at the top of the key, and he threw a pass to a cutter for
Gelding, yeah.
to Keldon, and that's totally a play that Jokic would have made at the other end of the floor. It was exactly what Nikola would have done, and I thought that was cool to see that. The end of the San Antonio game didn't go great, Tom. And you were there for that one. Just any minutia there that you wanted to get into of what went wrong at the end against. I mean, you lose to a heck of a player, a multi-time MVP. Like, there's no shame in losing to Denver in overtime. But what sticks out to you about how that one got away at the end?
Well, not just the end of the game, but the fourth and overtime. They were outscored like 41-19. It's just like the offense blew a fuse. And that was the game that Chris Paul wasn't a big participant offensively, wasn't hunting shots and being aggressive like we saw last night in Chicago. And I think that played a factor in that. With him being passive, I think it just threw everything off. And Wemby in the fourth overtime too, he admitted afterward that he could have been a little more assertive. So yeah, it's just, being aggressive and keeping the foot on the pedal, pardon the cliche, but that's basically what it came down to.
What's the concern level that this kind of offensive power outage has happened in 2 straight fourth quarters now? And you can, not to single out anybody, but you look at your leading scorer. Wemby had 3 points in fourth quarter and overtime against Denver and was scoreless in the fourth quarter against Chicago.
Yeah, it took only 2 shots. That's what stood out to me, and I asked him about it, and he said, "Yeah, I could have been more assertive." So, yeah.
It's just I'm almost laughing at us, laughing at the whole media.
know what you mean? It's
Like,
two games.
after the if we I mean we if we would have recorded this podcast 4 days ago, how different would we be sounding
Right.
about how Victor is taking over
We're
for
gonna be until June.
we're gonna be working till June, and I mean Victor's been a really for his 100 games. Hey, he celebrated his 100th game the other day.
Right.
And he celebrated his 21st birthday. His first 100 games, like, would anyone say that he wasn't clutch? That was the issue? Like he wasn't a good fourth quarter player? Like
For the longest time, that's what you almost would say the opposite. Like sometimes he takes a while to get into a game, but man, by fourth quarter time, and you need big
Exactly.
shots. Victor Wembanyama is hitting those things.
So
When the last two, he's been a little passive in the fourth, or maybe it's something that the defenses are doing to sort of take him out of it, and he's got to find a counter.
in some ways, and this is going to sound maybe a little ridiculous, um, he's been victimized by, I think, his immense trust in his teammates. Like Jeff, you mentioned to me last night about a couple of the drives that he had made in the fourth quarter where he gets the ball in the paint and really doesn't even look at the rim. He's immediately looking to fire a pass out to, let's say, Jeremy Sohan in the corner or Julian Champagny or whoever. And that's almost like he has so much belief that those guys can make a play for him that he's passing up the higher percentage shot that he could take himself. And if that's a criticism of a guy, like that's one that you can live with. He believes in the guys around him.
I think you're exactly right. He's their biggest cheerleader too. I mean, he wants those guys to do well and to succeed, and sometimes it's at his own detriment of the team. But no, I think you're exactly right about that, Mike.
And I don't necessarily mind the kick out to an open 3-point shooter at that in those situations. I mean, that's kind of what the game is these days. But I would also argue that if you're kicking out, if the result of your possession is a Jeremy Sohan taking a 3-pointer, you've played into the defensive hands.
Yeah.
Like just if you're Wemby, take the layup.
And that's something he has to learn. He has to learn like that. It's sometimes the right pass isn't the right pass, depending on the situation, depending on who the player is, where that player is, that type of thing. Hey, do you remember there was a generational number one lottery pick, biggest hyped prospect in years, who came into the league early on and got a lot of crap for passing the ball in the fourth quarter?
Are you talking about Andrea Bargnani?
That one, and there was another one, that, and I'm not sure how the kid turned out, less something.
Bronny's dad.
Bronny's dad.
That's who you mean.
So many times earlier in his career, it was like, why won't LeBron James take the shot? He's passing the ball. He's afraid of the moment. I think he did okay. I think, and Victor's not the same player that LeBron is, obviously, but LeBron had that too, where he thought, as he's making his move, when he was 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old, the game's on the line. I remember this vividly. He would make the pass because he thought it was the right pass, and his teammate would miss the shot, and he would get all kinds of grief for being afraid to take the shot himself. But I think he looked at the game the way Victor sort of does, and that, hey, that guy's open, and it's the right pass. I'm going to make it. LeBron figured out when to be aggressive, and I think Victor will too.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I mean, this is just a 21-year-old guy.
barely 21.
Barely 21. Turned 21 in France before he turned 21 in the United States. That was interesting.
You want to let the viewers listen about that?
That was Sandro coming through after the win in Denver when Victor was doing his media out in the hall. Sandro just kind of busts it up and announces that, hey, he's 21 in France now, because that was his birthday. His birthday was the next day.
Uh-huh.
So I guess it was a time zone joke.
And as I pointed out off the air, like, Sandro has a legitimate point there. Like, I think Sandro understands the world better than most of us. And really, Victor should have been. You should celebrate your birthday not based on where you are on your birthday, but where you were when you were born. So I think Sandro was correct. He was born in France. He was 21 years old when it was the 10 p.m. in Denver that night. He should have already been considered 21 because he was 21 in France. Sandro understands things that most of us don't.
So I'm going to just tell her when I was born on Jupiter and I'm 15 years old.
Well, there you go. I'm not sure people would buy that, but
I bet they would.
Listen to Sandro more is my point. What else did we want to talk about this from the past 4 games? Any more Stefan Castle observations? Did we do that too much last week?
Yeah, I don't know. He's just kind of what I don't know. He's back on. He started the one game when Sohan was hurt and was fine, and now he's back on the bench playing limited minutes and figuring things out. It doesn't, as we talked about last week, it doesn't also look as spectacular often as it did earlier in the year when he was starting and playing 26 minutes a night. So it's going to be short bursts, and he'll do good things and bad things. How's Devin Vassell doing? What's your take on him?
Well, I feel like you're leading me. I did have a nice chat with Devin at shoot-around before the Chicago game, and that seems like a long time ago too. And this might eventually make it into expressnews.com, the hard copy edition of the Express News. Maybe not this week, maybe not today, but just the idea of when Devin Vassell got hurt to end last season, he was a guy who was still averaging, 18, 19 a game, still playing with a rookie in Victor Wembanyama whose game was not as complete as it is now, who wasn't necessarily like as ball dominant as he's become. And so Devin Vassell, especially going back to the year before Victor was drafted, Devin had spent a lot of time with the Spurs as the number 1 option and as the guy who felt like he had to hunt his shots, that he had to be the aggressive one, lead scorer role, all that kind of stuff. He comes back to the Spurs several weeks into the season after having off-season surgery, and he comes back as a backup and joins a rotation in which Victor Wembanyama has become a much more complete, dominant player, and you're not gonna have as many opportunities as Victor's sidekick. And the point of the conversation with Devin is just he admits that Victor is doing so much that his role has changed in a way, and he's got to find his spots, and he's got to remind himself that, hey, he can't just be floating around and watching Victor dominate. Instead of being the lead scorer, he can still be a second scorer, but in a way where he'd keep his aggression. There's that theme that Tom talked about with Chris Paul. You still need to find your aggressive spots. And I just think that's interesting to see how even the role of a second player around Victor Wembanyama can change as Victor's game grows. And I think Devin's been pretty good lately. He wasn't great last night against Chicago, but I think he's making progress in figuring that out, as so many people around him are.
Yeah, I think the process is good with him so far. I think recently he's missing shots. But you figure that will iron itself out. But the process is good. He's looking for his looks. He's getting the looks he wants. He's been like a slam dunking fool lately, like getting in the paint and stuff. So I think I just think his shooting percentages have not been what you'd want, and I think there's an ebb and flow to that throughout the season and regression to the mean and yada yada. And once that bounces back, you'll see something pretty special from him, I think.
When I asked Mitch about what he's doing better, Devin Vassell, Mitch said he's better understanding what winning plays are, which I thought was a pretty high compliment.
Yeah.
Of Devin. Like, I think that Mitch is not going to BS you. He's not going to come out and rip players, but when he says something like that, Jeff and Tom, you can chime in on this. It seems like he's pretty sincere when he offers compliments to people. Like it's not hollow praise usually with him. So, yeah, I think they're happy with him. Yeah. What else do you want to talk about this week? You want to talk about De'Aaron Fox?
Sure.
I'm going to throw out a grenade.
Sure. When's he showing up?
We're burying the lead. The Spurs are not going to make a midseason trade, a major midseason trade. You might see something before the trade deadline. We got about a month. I do think, and I mean this sincerely, like when I imagine which player best fits as a number 2 guy to Victor Wembanyama or a fellow all-star caliber player to fit alongside Victor Wembanyama, I have a hard time imagining somebody in terms of playing style at both ends of the floor, in terms of timeline, in terms of personality, all that stuff. I have a hard time imagining a better candidate than De'Aaron Fox. Or that's exactly the guy I want if I'm the Spurs. And so when you read reports that the Kings might have to consider moving him, and they've been playing better lately, by the way, since they fired Mike Brown and Doug Christie's taken over. They've won a few games in a row, and they're probably not going to trade anybody during the season. They might not trade anybody during the offseason. But when you read reports that they were considering it and that the Spurs were among the teams who had inquired, of course the Spurs were among the teams that would inquire. Like that would be front office malpractice if the Spurs wouldn't inquire, because that's just like your dream target. And I think that if that would ever come up, especially this offseason, if for some reason the Kings thing falls apart, if De'Aaron doesn't want to sign an extension, that is exactly the kind of player you should be interested in if you're the Spurs. He just fits so well. And I'll throw that out to the group.
And you're definitely reaching the point here eventually where it's time to spend some of these picks and upgrade the roster. You can't hold on to them forever. The trick has always been, who to spend the picks on and for how many and how much and when is the right move to, there's multiple moves you could make or try to make throughout, the course of this rebuilding process. And the trick is doing the right one and not doing the wrong one. Sometimes you do the wrong one, it does more harm than good, and you've wasted your picks and blah, blah, blah. That's always been the hard thing, is knowing when to pull the trigger. But I agree with you, De'Aaron would be that would be a nice little two-man game between those two.
I mean, amazing. And you talk about picking the right ones, not taking the wrong ones. Like if you longtime listeners of this podcast and readers of the newspaper know that I don't think any of us, and I know I wasn't ever a proponent of the Trae Young trade. And like I wouldn't have done that. I think that De'Aaron Fox is a better fit. I think he's a better defender. I think the timeline works. I think personality-wise, he'd fit in. He's a Texas guy. Not sure how much that matters, but it's part of it.
Wife has roots in San Antonio.
Wife has roots in San Antonio. I think that that with a Trae Young thing, there would be somewhat of a back and forth as to who the true star is. From everything I've gathered about De'Aaron Fox, I think he'd understand that he's like 1B to Victor, if not 2. I just think that would be awesome. And it probably won't happen. Like these things hardly ever happen. But if you're out there pondering what move the Spurs make, what big splash they make, that's the kind of move you're interested in. And as Jeff said, they have all these picks coming up. They have this cap space. You're going to have to use it at some point. The key is to use it on the right type of move. And, I think I mentioned this to a group of people talking about this yesterday here in Chicago. Like I don't think that the Spurs 1B or second superstar is on the roster right now. I think they really like Stephon Castle. I think they really like Devin Vassell, Jeremy Sohan. Like, those three guys are integral to the future. But when the Spurs compete for their next championship, I don't think any of those guys is the second option that you dream of. I think that player still is outside the organization. And you're probably not going to draft that guy, even though they have a lot of draft picks coming up. You're probably going to want to target somebody either in free agency or a trade, and I think that De'Aaron Fox is the kind of guy that could fit. I'm not sure what people are supposed to do with this because I don't think the trade's happening during this season, and it's just something to dream on, I guess.
I was going to say, all that said, I don't get the sense the Spurs are in this mode of like, oh, we're right there. We need to do something right now. No, of course, this season. If people are expecting that at this trade deadline, they're probably going to be sorely disappointed. I think the Spurs, this whole season was, can we take a palpable step forward? And so far they've done that. I think we were all saying if they're competing for a play-in spot, if they're just competing for the play-in spot, they've taken that step forward this year. That's a worthy goal. I don't see them pushing all their chips into the middle and going all in, just trying to make the playoffs this season. If they do, if they can, maybe there's some minor moves. Maybe this team is good enough to do it on its own, and if they do, great. But I don't think that's the overriding goal this season is oh my God, we got to make the playoffs. We're right there.
I'm glad you.
Or a backup big, maybe, to leading the playoffs this year. I don't know.
Yeah, that's an area of need. I'm glad Jeff brought some a much needed disclaimer there to make it clear that we're not pushing for a huge in-season trade, because that's not the goal at all. The reason I bring up Fox is if that player is available at this moment, they would be targeting him not to try to make the playoffs this season. That wouldn't be the goal of that. It would be, hey, this is a guy who could help us win championships in 2027 and 2028 and down the line and be here for the long haul.
The only reason you'd make that trade in season is if you thought, if we don't make it now, someone else is going to make it, and we're not going to have that shot.
Exactly. Or this is the deal is so good.
Yeah.
Why not make it now and go for it? Any deal like that just to make the contracts work, it would be like a Keldon Johnson and Zach Collins plus just a bunch of your picks. And I think if Sacramento would, and I don't think Sacramento is going to do this, but if for some crazy reason Sacramento would say that's what we want on February 4th, then I think you'd consider doing it. I think the odds against that are astronomical, but it's something to keep in mind heading into the offseason.
We're wasting everyone's time.
We're wasting everyone's time. But that's what people listen to podcasts for, is to waste their own time, to dream.
I mean, you wouldn't be listening to
on the future.
You wouldn't be listening to this podcast if you cared about wasting your own time.
Exactly. It's just another diversion to keep you from pondering just the bleakness of your own existence. And we're glad to help you.
And on that note,
think about that. We're glad for 30 minutes every week to help you not ponder the bleakness of your own existence. Like that's our jobs here. And we're so glad that you come along. We need to do the future prediction thing. That's the weekly routine.
Well, it's going to get bad.
What's ahead, Jeff? A Wednesday night game in Milwaukee against Giannis. 2 games that Tom will be covering in Los Angeles. Is there another one next Monday before we tape?
They got 2 against Memphis at home after the LA trip.
Okay, but let's just do the next 3. Milwaukee, LA. Is there a victory in there?
The way things have gone, probably, maybe one in LA.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go 1 and 2.
Jefford.
I'll give them a win. I don't know which one. I'll plant the flag. They're gonna surprise everyone in Milwaukee on Wednesday.
Holy cow! And then,
well, there's no consequence to being wrongs. I used to just say whatever I feel like.
With the win in Milwaukee, is that 2 for the week? You're not gonna.
I'll just give them 1, and I'll say that's gonna surprise people and be in Milwaukee.
Okay. Nick Talbot joined us during the taping here. Do you want to do your plant your flag or not?
Yeah, sure. As long as my mic's working here.
It does.
1 and 2. I think they get one of the maybe the middle one in Los Angeles. I think that makes the most sense.
I think we're unanimous in our 1 and 2 prediction. And
I like
Yeah.
your the bleakness of your existence. We can kind of tie it into French, Wemby, French existentialism.
yes,
Yeah.
Wimby's helping us avoid all that. And that's my gift to the listeners before we see you next time. Like find your diversions, appreciate what you can. Until next time, take care of each other, keep it real.